I'm now selling this shirt. There's a link in the description below. This is a limited edition thing, so if you don't order this time, that's kind of all that there is. I will have more merch in the future, but if you want this one, now is the time. Hi, my name is Sam Johnson and I'm a voice teacher. Today I'm going to be reacting to and analyzing myself in high school performing Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. I just get anxiety hearing this music. Not just anxiety, but just this rush of oh no, do I remember all my lines? And it's been 10 years since I've been in this, and the music still has that kind of effect on me. Wow, that was actually a lot more forward than I thought it was. You want a piece of the loaf of bread. You brought the house. I broke the window pane. My child was close to death, and we were starving again. I was so bad at acting at this point in my life, and that wasn't at all a concern for me when I was in this show. Unfortunately, I was so caught up in just being able to sing the notes that I didn't give the character nearly as much work as it deserved. And you can see it all the way through, where most of my decisions are how do I get this note and not sound bad? I was so obsessed with sounding good, which, I guess that's okay. I needed to sound good, but I didn't have a nice balance between thinking about character and being in my head about the music. Look down, freedom is mine, the earth is still, I feel the wind, I breathe again, and the sky clears, the world is waking. Never forget the years, the waste, nor forgive them for what they've done. They are the guilty, everyone. The day begins, and now let's see what this new world will do for me. You can hear on the E where I was really letting a little bit more weight than is necessary start coming into the sound. This world is left for me. I didn't know that I didn't have to beef sounds up at this point. Silver in my hand cost twice what I had earned. In all those 90 years, that lifetime of despair. And yet you trusted me. You trusted me, done this bit of good. I played greatness, so things seemed like I should. But when the house was still, I got a vision at night. Took the silver, took my blood. Actually, not as bad as I remember it being. That was an F. It has always been one of the harder notes for me to sing. I think that was maybe the first time that I had ever performed an F and been really excited about it and had it been kind of consistent, but it was still just this big effort of pulling weight up. I wasn't really thinning out as I went to higher notes. My high notes were always a little bit louder than the rest of everything. It just wasn't super balanced. However, that wasn't actually as far off as I thought it was. If I had just let it kind of go into a little bit nastier sound, I think I could have started bringing that up, but I was more flight than flight. The second one is much more sustainable for me. I can do that a lot longer. It doesn't use nearly as much vocal capital. But the first one, it was a decent sound. There was a reason I was cast in this. I wasn't great. It was my first musical ever, but I could sing some. I was just very, very inconsistent. Price in the dark that nobody hears. Where I stand at the turning Yeah, I mean, all of the movements that I'm doing with my body and hands are not normal people movements. It's just like stand and sing. I thought that I had to move my hands, but I didn't really know how that was affected by what I was singing about. So if I was talking to myself 10 years ago, I would try to just get myself to have every action kind of motivated by what I was talking about and who I was talking to. I mean, I was just standing out like this the whole time, and that was kind of the extent of my acting for a lot of this. I was very squared off. It looks like I'm gonna fight all the time, where I guess at this point in the story, yes, Valjean is very angry and probably looking to fight a little more often than not, but it just doesn't look natural. Everything about it just looks like, I know I need to be doing something with my body, so I'm gonna do something with my body, rather than making movements that are actually motivated by the story and motivated by what I'm singing about and who I'm looking at and everything. Like, in regards to eye shifts, the most that I was doing was just kind of going to each exit sign. It wasn't motivated by anything other than trying to not be in the same spot for a while. Okay, one thing that is very helpful for adding movements to performances is figuring out what parts of the orchestration actually call for big movements. I kind of like that I had that drop associated with a big orchestral thing. If a composer writes something big like that, they want a big movement. They want a big shift. Everything that a composer writes is motivated by something, and it's your job as a performer to kind of bring that out. I didn't do it for most of it, but for that one, you know, I was kind of close. It kind of jumps out. On that soul, I kind of grabbed on it. He told me that I had a soul, because I couldn't make the sound without being loud. I would love for it to have been more gradual as I went up there. How does he know? No, everything is kind of punchy. My life. Is there another way to go? I am reaching, but I fall. The night is closing in as I stare into the void, the whirlpool of my sin. I'll escape now from the world of Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean is nothing now. Another story must begin. When I was at that part, my entire way that I was able to get through that was just shoving it in my nose as far as possible. There was so much pressure underneath everything, and it was pretty much as loud and as high as I could go with full voice at that point. You didn't really hear any of it turn over. It just sounds like this big sound, which, you know, so far everything has at least sounded like the same voice. It just doesn't sound like it's sustainable or like it's a sound that I can take any higher than that. Jean Valjean is nothing now. I still need to kind of have it roll over into my nose, so I was right with that, but I also wasn't letting it relax. It's like I had that feeling of it going into my nose coupled with just this intense amount of pressure from underneath, and I wasn't able to kind of break that down. It took me a long time to be able to start making those more pharyngeal or edgy sounds without pushing, without being really, really big underneath it. Part of it was that I was 17 and my voice just wasn't done changing. It had been pretty recent since everything had dropped, so I was still unsure about where my instrument was. And that takes a long time to get used to what you're capable of after you have a big hormonal change like that. Yeah, that was just too much. I would just try to get myself to reduce the pressure first, keep the same kind of placement, and then add a little bit more weight gradually rather than just blasting it and being as loud as I could just to get something out. However, in that moment, that was kind of the only way I could do it. I didn't really have any other way of doing it. And while I was working on preparing this role, a lot of what we were doing was maybe not beneficial in the long run, but we had this goal of okay, you have to go sing these notes that you were not able to do before. How can we at least get something out? And this was kind of our compromise of maybe not being the best technique ever, but I could get away with it for a few times during the night.
Now come on, lady, settle down. I run a business up if you die, I'm the mayor of this town. I look to you to sort this out and be as patient as you can.
I hate how percussive I was with that. I look to you to sort this out and be as patient as you can. Some of it was just because I didn't trust the tracks very much, even though I had been practicing with them for a while. It's hard to sing with tracks sometimes. But come on, just like make it more legato, make it flowy, make it more like a sentence. I look to you to sort this out and be as patient as you can. Let it be very spoken like that. Because the tendency is to get super broken up like this, and it sounds bad.
I do believe this woman's tale. You've done your duty, let her be. She needs a doctor, not to jail.
And then the same thing when I went up to the F, it was right above my bridge, so the only way that I really knew how to navigate that was by increasing the volume. I would have loved to just not have volume and pitch coupled like that. And every single time that I was doing that, like I'd have to furrow my brow, everything just got harder. It's just working way too hard.
Is it true what I've done? When innocent soul.
Right there, innocent soul. Everything just got so dark all the time. I would have also loved to tell myself that I didn't have to sound that dark. I was over-rounding a lot of the time. Listening back, I had a lot more room to start brightening this sound up without it actually starting to pull. I was thinning out enough that I think some of those vowel changes would have been helpful, but a lot of what I was focusing on was narrowing so that I was able to get through my bridge, or so that I would get up to my bridge and not squeeze too much. When you pull chest, when you pull this big feeling up, it's coupled with opening your mouth as wide as you can a lot of the time, and so by narrowing it, making the vowels a little bit more like than sometimes that helps get through the bridge. But once you kind of are able to do that, you do have room to start brightening the sound up. See that tonight? Just grabbed. It just didn't need that kind of disparity between the two notes.
If I should fall in the battles begun, let this be my goodbye. Now that I know that you love me as well as
every time it gets a little bit more intense as it goes higher.
Bring me home to be with you. Pray for your marriage, he prays for you.
Especially on that ooh. There's no reason to keep it nearly as narrow as what I did. He prays for you. He prays for you. It didn't need to change the sound entirely. It's like every time I had a chance to get it back or to over narrow, I totally went for it. Everything was rounded. Actually super impressed by how I'm not pushing too much yet. But that's the first place where it starts grabbing. And you can see just in my lip how it's covering my upper teeth. He is young. As I start going higher with that, it just will not sustain. I really wish that I had kept it more of a he is young. But I was so concerned with the tone of everything that I was like, oh, if I round it, it becomes a better tone. Which actually wasn't the case. It's just so many things that I thought were helping me that were actually hindering. I like that sound though. And there it grabs. Bring!
Again,
very choppy.
If God had granted me
It's kind of hard in operas like this, or musicals like this. It is kind of an opera because there's no real spoken dialogue all the way through. It's sung all the way through. But it's hard when it gets more syllabic rather than legato. And I found that I really preferred singing just the really legato long line things because it helps. Going to this more staccato thing, it's just harder vocally and it starts sounding bad. It just doesn't sound as good as if I was able to smooth that out a lot more. Summers. Everything was all. Gone. And of course these higher notes are going to start getting harder and harder because I'm singing everything so and dark and not letting the brightness that was actually working a lot better than I thought in my voice in. I wish that I had recorded myself to see how some of these things were affecting me because I did not use that enough while I was preparing this role, especially videoing. If I had videoed everything that I was doing, I'm sure I would have been like, wait, that looks weird, even though I didn't know what I know now. Man, I wish I could do this again. This is also a lowered key because I just couldn't go high enough. At this point in the show, I was singing so heavy and so tired from everything else. See right there, it kind of works. You can take. That would let me go back up, but instead I over-narrow again. You. It's just inconsistent.
Let him live. If I die,
See, now it's just straight up chest voice. Yeah. There's none of that ping that I had at any other time. And then there's a little bit of the ping. And a little bit more as soon as I back off. Just working way too hard. And then I flip. That was for the F sharp. So at the end, when I flipped, it's because I could not hold on to any of that connection anymore because it was just chest voice. It was never letting it mix up into my head. A lot of it was because of the vowels, because I was just over rounding everything and making it super dark. But it didn't let me go to a bring him home. I was completely flipped into falsetto because I was too heavy at the bottom. And when you sing that heavy, it makes it really, really difficult to have a smooth transition up into your high notes, which generally don't support that much weight.
there on you and wait too long. The faithful servant that his post once for. This man's done no wrong and he needs a doctor's care.
I was just engaging a lot of
I'm
jaw.
not giving. I will be swaying another hour yet, and then I'm yours and all our debts are paid.
Everything was so heavy, I wasn't able to even get to all the pitches at this point. And that's because, you know, we're an hour and a half into this show, and I was overdoing everything. I was able to get these notes just isolated when I was practicing, but that's how the kind of technique that you're using really does matter. If you're singing in a way that is not efficient, it's going to make things harder as time goes on. You might be able to get away with it for a little bit, but holding on to that as it continues, my physical instrument was just so shot that I wasn't able to do the good things that I wanted. And so I was falling back into some of my older habits, which was, let's just pull pure chest up as much as possible. And yeah, this is the result. See, now you can't really hear any of the same ping that you heard at the beginning of it. Because that urge to just pull chest was so strong that that took over everything I was doing, no matter what volume.
He stole some bread to save his sister's son.
And it sounds fine for some parts, it's just not usable for an entire show.
vocals that can break your heart. It's vocals that this must be faced. If he is God, she is disgraced. The time has come to journey on.
That almost worked when I went to the time has come. It's just I didn't stay in that place. It went right back to huge chest voice land, which works for like the low stuff. So every time that I'm singing under a middle C, it sounds okay, especially when I go to a big chest voice vowel like ah or o, but it just is impossible to come up. The few times that I am able to let it go there, it's just not consistent.
From this day you must be gone. Who am I?
Almost works again.
Who am I? Lord Jean Valjean.
Oh, that was pretty.
What can I do that would turn you from this, monsieur? You cannot be. Whatever I tell my beloved Cosette, she will never be. Make her believe I have gone on a journey alone.
Just listen between Marius and me. Marius is singing so much lighter at this point. I was very, very heavy, and not to make excuses, but I was a little bit sick at this point. You have this added thing of just the heaviness from being sick, in addition to how much I was using a very heavy configuration, and it's just wearing on the voice. You cannot sing it for 2 hours. And then we hear Marius come in with this very spoken kind of place, and it's very sustainable, and it sounds a lot younger, and it's really nice. It's a much more usable sound, so I think that if I had brought everything back to this kind of place, it would have lightened everything up on these parts where I didn't need to be nearly as heavy. I didn't even have that expectation in my mind of needing to sound big for these parts, and yet just through habit, I always went back to that place.
Away, away. Tell her her heart was too full for farewells, it is better this
You can
way.
see in my neck,
That will never know.
just a lot going on.
What I have spoken, why I must go. For the sake of Cosette, it must be so.
Then his is just pingy and easy. Wow, I kind of like that. See, it starts okay, and then I decide to pull again. If I had just stayed in the same configuration that I was 2 seconds before, instead of going, where you, and then grabbing onto it, it probably would not have cracked like that. Dramatically, it would make more sense for me to not want to grab, but I was so concerned with sounding good. And to me, only connected voices, like completely connected, really big voices, were good. That's just kind of where I was at, and I was mad every time I would crack, so I would just grab on harder. But the stuff before sounded better, and pedagogically it was a much better place. I just needed to learn how to open up the vowel without grabbing. And then it's completely disconnected because I just yelled for a second. Then it's okay again. It was just completely flipped. But that last part, if I had sung everything in that place, it would have been so much better. Like all the way through this show. I haven't seen this video in a really long time, and I think that there were some things that I did really well. Especially at the beginning, kind of the first half, the first act of this. I was making a lot of smart choices where I didn't blast through all the way through, where I totally could have. I just wish that I had gone further in that direction, that I was letting my voice lighten up, letting it move up into my head. I really just needed to spend a lot more time in that lighter place before I started grabbing again. This was the first musical I ever did, and I was cast as the lead, and so I spent kind of 4 or 5 months preparing this role all the time. I worked really, really hard that summer, and I think that it shows. I think that I was pretty well prepared vocally, but I oversang all the way through. It was really inconsistent. My legato wasn't very good. A lot of it was pretty choppy. But for a 17-year-old, for my first musical, I thought I did a pretty good job. If I was doing this again now, I would probably make my entire focus on acting and trying to not look like such a wet noodle up there. I think that that was probably the worst part about everything. I wasn't able to do any of it because I was so in my head about the vocal technique. I was so concerned about whether I was going to sound good on the next note that I wasn't able to do anything with character development. This musical deserves a lot more than that. So I wish that I had been able to do that, or that had been more of a priority for me. Because overall, like, listening back, the voice, even though it was rough at times, it wasn't that bad. If I had just acted all the way through, I don't think most people would have cared about the weird stuff I was doing with my voice, because I was 17 and just the expectations aren't nearly as high. But I feel like the stuff that I did well is really cheapened by just how not present I was, how in my head I was about just trying to sound good. But listening to everything, I think I was a lot closer than I thought that I was in the moment. I thought I was pretty good, but I was so scared with most of it. But I was still so new to voice lessons and to vocal technique. I was 17, I had been in lessons less than a year, and most of what we were doing with my lessons was preparing this part and just trying to make it so that I could sing through it, and I did accomplish that. And I don't think I gave myself enough credit in the moment to let myself move on and worry about other things other than my voice, because while I was on that stage, every single second I was just thinking about, will this work? How can I sing this and make it sound good? And I was so concerned with those things, and you can see it. It's so obvious all the way through that I'm just in my head. I'm not making any sort of organic movements, and it's unfortunate because I could have taken that next step. I just wasn't ready psychologically for it, which is good because this was educational theater, so who really cares? Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'm now selling this shirt. There's a link in the description below. This is a limited edition thing, so if you don't order this time, that's kind of all that there is. I will have more merch in the future, but if you want this one, now is the time. So thank you for watching.